Welcome to the Spare Parts Podcast with FTC Team 535 Tobor. This is episode 6. I came, I saw, I launched.
Hello and welcome to the Spare Parts Podcast with FTC Team 535 Tobor. This is the second podcast of the year, and we're going to be discussing shooter mechanisms for Velocity Vortex. But before we get into that, make sure you check out our website. It's a Google site, so just do a Google search for Tobor 535. You'll find us. We're also on Twitter, YouTube, and Google+. And before we start on shooting mechanisms, let's have everybody introduce themselves. So I'm Ben.
I'm Steven.
I'm Link.
Connor.
And I'm Rand.
Right, and we are 5 members of Team 535 Tobor. So let's jump right in today with shooting mechanisms. And we'll start with what we like to call the hammer mechanism. So I guess a very brief description, and we can put up some pictures in the show notes for this, would essentially be a big axle with some kind of weighted hammer type thing on it. It spins around, and every time it passes some certain point, we hit the ball.
Just think of the croquet robot from the intro video that came up and was hitting the little particles. It's that kind of a thing, but this is meant to swing around and hit the ball from below to launch it up.
And not as ridiculous.
Well, maybe as ridiculous. Don't be so silly.
Okay, so I guess benefits of that design.
Well, it's, I suppose in theory it's supposed to be consistent. If you've got a weight, you can modify the weight depending on your distance so that it swings around and hits it.
Yes, and depending on the weight of that hammer, you could get a good amount of force behind that hit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean you have to gear it so that it can turn, which...
Not to mention, it's a hammer on a motorized axle, so it's exceptionally easy to make.
Yeah, it is very
it's,
easy.
It's quite literally just...
And also, it would be
Hammer
very easy to
on an
change
axle.
the kind of the speed of launch based on by changing the number of rotations. So
Or
the
you
speed of
could
rotation.
shorten or lengthen the axle depending on whether or not you needed more force.
It's exceptionally
You mean the
easy to
hammer.
fabricate.
Well,
Yeah.
the hammer's
arm.
arm. Yeah, I suppose that is what you call it. Or you could just take a person's arm.
Let's blur the gap between human and robots here.
Okay, yeah, we won't be doing that in FTC. But how about downsides of that design? I guess the obvious thing is that if you've got kind of an axle, especially with most of the materials we deal with, I think you're going to be bending some axles.
I also think you're going to take up a rather large amount of space in your robot with this.
Yeah.
Not to mention, you could possibly burn out motors while the hammer is spinning around. The backfeed from all the weight going down at once could kill more than a couple motors.
Yeah, it's
definitely.
probably be weird on it because there's so much force going up the one side and then it swings on its own, so you're going from a lot of torque on the motor to torque going the other way really on the motor. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, but you probably need some really nice motors or methods to make sure, like some
Yeah, or
heavy
like some
gearing
kind of decoupling thing
to make sure the motor doesn't get hurt.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next design, which we are going to call the catapult design.
Tried, true, and known throughout the Middle Ages everywhere.
I guess you could say that's true.
Need a Castle Dawn? I'm your
So, do we think, I guess, what are the benefits of the catapult design as far as FTC goes?
It's reliable in projectile. It hits its...
maybe.
It always has the same consistent arc throughout.
Yeah, probably. I think it would be, I guess I can agree with reliability.
I think that depending on how you do the catapult, obviously you could just hook it up to a motor the way like almost the hammer was, but it only goes for a certain amount of time. But you could also do it where there's like a spring or some kind of elastic that you pull it back and then it releases and fires it. And that way you could get some, that way you wouldn't put as much different stresses on the motor. And you could change out the spring or the elastic to get different amounts of strength, so that could be nice.
So I guess if we move on to downsides a little bit, it would be really hard to build, I think, and pretty hard to motorize, right?
Yeah.
Depending
It could be
on
done,
what you go for.
but it would probably take a long time and be kind of complicated.
The main problem I see is trying to pull back the actual arm itself, because that will take such a long time, and there always being 2 minutes.
It depends on how long your arm
Yeah,
is.
I mean, you can gear the motor in various different ways, and depending on how long the arm and what the tension is, that could. I don't think that would be a serious problem.
Yeah, because I was watching video from a Vex game that launched, and the robot had a catapult. It was just consistently hitting it quickly, at least once every second.
Yeah.
One
Firing.
thing I would say about the catapult for this year's game, because the goals that were trying to hit us so easily moved around, the catapult, in order to know exactly when it's releasing it, you're probably going to need some method of stopping it. So, like, if you have it pulled back and launch, you need to have it stop at the same place so you know what arc it's going in. And one thing that means is it's going to be really hard to get different arcs using this method. You're probably only going to have one arc. And if you want multiple arcs, you're going to have to find a way of changing the way you stop it from launching. Stop it from throwing the balls. And
Yeah, you wouldn't
that
have a
gets
lot
little
of
more
control
complicated.
over the trajectory of the ball, so you'd have to do a lot more positioning in terms of where you are in relation to the goals. And you couldn't really modify, it would be difficult to modify, definitely the angle, and also to some extent the speed of the
And
launch.
there's always ways to, obviously. Most of the things when we say they're not possible, what we really mean is they're not feasible. 'cause-
Not probable.
Or they would just take a
Not
long
useful.
time to do. So, any other comments on the catapult launcher?
Someone's breaking into the door. Oh my god, what is this?
We're all going to be
Well,
murdered.
it's another team member, Tony
Hey!
over here.
Hey, it's Tony.
It'd be better if you'd introduce yourself.
Right here for Tobor time.
Hello, my name is Tony. I'm a programmer. This is my senior year on Team Tobor.
Wonderful. Now that you gave them all that useless information, let's get back to the issue at hand, the
come
catapult. Do you have anything to say about the launching mechanism known as a catapult on the robot to launch balls?
I think it would be kind of hard to build on a robot.
Yeah, that's kind of what we brought up too.
Basically, yes. Takes up some space, hard to aim, more than one direction. Just not what we call feasible.
Yeah, or definitely hard. I mean, we kind of, I liked on one of the videos we saw, there was that kind of a board that said good, easy, and fast, and then pick two, right? So you can have two of those desirable attributes, but not all three. So let's move on. We have another new person. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Matt, is that a good introduction?
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay.
And so we've gone through kind of a hammer shooter and a catapult shooter, and we're going to move on to spinning wheels. So essentially, you have your ball, you've got two or potentially one spinning wheel, and then you try to use that force, the spinning force, to launch your ball, kind of like a
Better known as a pitching
machines
machine. Yeah. That's what common
So
means.
I guess let's start with benefits of that design.
It's always reliable as long as both wheels are spinning at the same speed.
Well, I think one of
The
the major
chute's always in the same.
What do you mean?
Yeah, the major
reliable?
point is that I think I like to see it as it doesn't have to do that. You can change the speeds, you can change the distances of it. So it allows you to shoot from different positions, unlike what we saw with the catapult or maybe the hammer.
Different
With aiming,
speeds.
Different
there are two
speeds, so.
factors. You have to have speed and an angle. I feel like if you want to ditch the angle, you can vary your speed by using motors.
So that you can change where you need to shoot from based on how fast you spin the wheels.
Yeah.
I think I also heard that one thing about the spinning wheels also is if you're smart about it, you can use them to help suck in the balls. So like obviously you've got to have some way of moving the particles to whatever shooter you have. And with the spinning wheels, one thing you could do is integrate them into whatever mechanism you have, bringing the particles up so that it's just a straight shot right up into the launcher. And that way, there's not as much changeover. You don't need as many parts to make sure that the ball goes from the whatever your collection mechanism is to the shooter. It could just go right into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that would be kind of hard to implement an effective collector that way, but it's possible. I know we tried to kind of do just a single spinning wheel with a flat plate next to it during Cascade Effect. That ended up working out pretty miserably.
The best way to describe that is of the FTC team Broken Axles.
That is quite accurate.
So many broken axles.
And you might have noticed we've moved into now the problems with this design.
Yeah, so cons of the design, definitely. Well, with Tetrix parts, it seems to be pretty difficult to build. And so if we could have really good stability and we didn't have a lot of size constraints, I think you could get it working pretty well, as we've seen with pitching machines. But with the constraints that we have in terms of what we can use, what kind of motors, and how much space we can take up to stabilize the things, I think we're fairly limited.
And I mean, from our experience back in Cascade Effect when we had wiffle balls, the main problem we did is we had a one shooting wheel to spin up and launch the balls.
Which again had to do with the space constraints.
Yeah.
But we only had it anchored on one side, and this is a little bit of a rookie mistake for us. But you've got to be careful about making sure that it's anchored on both sides, because those wheels go spinning really fast. And even with smaller wheels, if you spin them for long enough, they can start to get wonky. The axles can bend a little bit as you spin it, and it just starts causing problems. So if you're looking into doing spinning wheels, then it's not that it's not possible. We've seen teams do it before, right? We've seen videos of that.
Yes.
I think all in all, you need to have the prior experience with that type of shooting system to get more consistent design, I feel. Because someone going directly into it, I feel, would have a lot more problems than a previously experienced team.
Well, you can't get experience if you don't try at least the first time. But I think it could be a viable option, but it will require a bit of testing.
Yeah, with the proper testing, prototyping, and research, I feel like you could almost accomplish anything, really.
Yeah, you could get it to work. I mean, I would say it's probably going to be fairly difficult in our Tetrix world.
But it will allow you to vary the speed, and there are plenty of other teams that have tried doing it before, so there should be a fair amount of research you can do on it.
But as well as that, there's plenty of other ideas.
And you aren't actually limited to Tetrix parts, so you could come up with almost anything you wanted to, really. I'm thinking more of having enough room to properly support the shooter on both sides, mostly.
But yeah, so something to consider.
Well, move on to our next one.
So our next possible design that we generated, and this is one that we actually really liked, was kind of like a pinball shooter. So if you imagine in a pinball machine when you first launch the ball, there's kind of a spring-loaded shooter that you pull back and then it releases the ball. So we liked that base because it was consistent. It would always shoot in basically a straight line. Were there any other benefits to that design?
Well, unlike a lot of the spinning things, it only took up space in the vertical, in the line it was firing in. At least the actual shooting mechanism. Now, one thing we learned later is that getting the shooting mechanism to be pulled back is a little trickier, but the mechanism itself only goes in the one direction.
Yeah.
Kind of adding on to Ben's, it also usually you can keep a very constant angle on it, so with calculations on where you're firing, it's pretty easy to do.
It's very linear. I also noticed, I mean, if you have the ability to, you can, with it designed correctly, adjust the power on the pinball too. I mean...
by pulling back different distances. But that would be kind of hard to build some kind of mechanism for that.
To do it. But it's possible, and you can always change out springs and get more powerful springs if you're not getting the height you need.
And it's definitely unique. You're probably not going to see that many robots out there with a pinball.
Now, that might mean that it's more difficult to get to work, but it is something to consider, that the space it could save you. It might be necessary for your robot, and it could be a really good design that you could maybe win some awards for.
Yeah.
Now,
all right, and then we'll move on to the last thing, which we're calling a flipper. So if you imagine some kind of flexible material like a plastic or a piece of slightly flexible steel on some sort of axle spinning, it gets caught on kind of a bar, gets bent back, and then eventually flips up and out, launching a ball. In our experience, that's worked decently. It's been mildly consistent, not great, but all right.
I mean, it's like the hammer or the catapult. It has a certain degree which it will fire. It's not like the spinning, which will have multiple angles, but we have seen it work. It needs to be at a certain place, though.
And it will, as the hammer would, take up a certain amount of space, because it spins around in a circle, you need that whole 360 degrees spin in order for it to go. Now, one thing, because it moves slowly and it gets its force by bending a piece of plastic,
Less danger.
it's probably going to put less pressure on your motor as it tries to pull that weight up and then swing that weight down. So that's one advantage of it as opposed to a hammer hitter.
But the main advantage that I see here is just its simplicity. It's easy to build. You need few materials, one motor, maybe some gears if you want. But it's something that you can, if you absolutely don't have anything to do and you need to be able to shoot balls, this is a great option.
I feel like
Yeah.
something important in it is the material. That's something really that needs to be looked into when doing the flipper too.
Because just not every plastic will bend at
Yeah.
the right amount to be stiff enough to give you power, but be flexible enough to not break when you're bending it.
Yeah, and
But
so
that
we,
would also give you
we made a
options.
prototype that used, I think it was polyethylene pretty effectively, and we were able to, the robot was able to score from the edge of the field to the center goals.
Good power.
But it would be very difficult to change the speed and the angle of launch.
It's
and so
pretty set.
if both the speed and the angle are set, the only thing you can change is the distance from the goal, so you have to be equidistant from the goal every single time.
Which is something to consider.
Considering
Yeah.
that the goals can
Obviously,
Yeah.
we here at Crawfordsville Robotics on Tobor do some research before we start prototyping, and one of the things we actually got this idea from Hotshot, which is how many years ago?
Ooh, like
say 3 or 4.
6 or 7.
Really?
It's-
6 or
it's
7?
more than
Yeah,
3 or
a good
4,
few
yeah.
years ago, and one of the world competition robots was using this mechanism, which is where we got the idea from. And they'd used it quite effectively. They'd found a material that worked well, and they were getting very consistent shots. Now, of course, they had a stationary thing they were shooting into.
Yeah.
And ours is moving, but if you can overcome that, it's a very easy thing to build and put together.
Yeah, and I think the fact that that center goal can move has been kind of underappreciated so far.
And
Um,
at least in the first half, it probably won't move much, but if a ball hits it, it'll spin at least 45 degrees from what we've seen,
Yeah.
which is a fair amount when shooting a particle up into it.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Well, it definitely has, again, a good amount of power behind it, and it is a scoring mechanism that we know will work.
So I think I would call that the fast and easy option. It's not necessarily the best, but it will work
I could
well,
agree with
and you
calling
can
it
build
that.
it easily.
It's very simplistic, but reliable.
Yeah.
What are some disadvantages do you guys think?
we talked about
Finding
it.
the material.
Yeah, one,
Yeah.
it's,
Gotta find
there's only one area where you'll be able to shoot from. There's only one distance you'll be able to shoot from.
It's very fixed in its ways.
yeah.
But if
But
you
it's very
can,
consistent in its fixed ways, which is
Exactly.
Yeah,
But like the
typically.
hammer or the
It's trade-off.
catapult, it will take up that full rotational space necessary for that flap to go around.
and
Yeah.
so really, in the end, we talk about these ideas, we talk about the ones we prefer, but really it's whatever robot you're catering towards. If
Yeah.
you have something where maybe you've got too little space to be able to try and change the angle of the shooter, maybe going for something with like the spinning wheel so you can change the speed might be the way to go. Maybe if you've got plenty of space and you want to be able to hit it consistently, maybe something like the hammer, the flipper, the catapult might be
Yeah,
the
if
way to
you're
go.
a more Viking robot, the catapult could be the option.
Oh, please, battering rams.
If you named
Battering rams.
If you named your robot a pinball wizard, the pinball shooter might be for you.
If you like the Who.
That's right. Pinball wizard.
All right, then. Well, let's kind of wrap up. Let's give an update of where we are. I guess yesterday we had a ruling on the forums about having kind of a recycling system where you keep shooting the same ball over and over again and then just collecting it again, and that's not allowed this year.
That has been shot down.
Yeah, and so I
Big
think
time.
there's a joke somewhere about there's been a great disturbance in the force. All of these teams' designs have cried out and been silenced.
One of the things about that kind of makes sense to me is if you look at the way they built the game with the way that first they told you flat out you're not allowed to score them until they've touched the ground, and they've got those funnels for spreading the balls out,
Everything you see is specifically for
preventing
not
you from
allowing.
making loops.
Yeah, so- and-
it kind of makes sense
and
that they
the-
would say, nah.
Yeah, then the teams are like, you know what, we want to try it anyway. and they said no.
I understand it, but yeah, you can see clearly on the field those kind of inverse funnels, I'll call them, underneath those baskets that are designed to spread out where the balls go, and the rule about having to touch the floor that stuff was in the original game. It was clearly designed so that it would be very, very difficult to set up a ball recycling system, but it looked like some teams were going to be able to do that, and so then we saw that the ruling that wasn't fair. And I see the logic of that. It's kind of a shame in terms of our design, but it does make sense, their idea about if every robot did this, would the game be fun? No, right?
You know what would be interesting to see, though? One robot in a fixed position that could shoot and consistently score in the basket every time, and their partner robot going out and collecting the balls and delivering it back to their partner.
And that might be, especially at the lower level, if you've got a shooting mechanism, if you can find a teammate and they're probably, I'm guessing this year's version of the push bot would be a button bot. A bot
Yeah, that's what we
just
talked
meant
about
to go
last
and
year,
press
but they could
buttons.
also kind of deliver balls to
So
any robots
maybe
that
if
are
you're
able to
shooting
shoot.
and you want to stay close to the shooter, they could just, after they maybe hit some beacons, scoot around and knock the balls towards you so you don't have to go as far and you can score more points.
Because I
And
know we definitely talked about in our last one that teamwork would have a much higher role
Be
in this game.
different than last year. Instead of having both of you, it's like, well, you go this side and I go this side and we do our thing. You're going to have to coordinate, like, who does the cat ball, who gets how many
But
of the
I could
particles.
almost imagine that the same thing might happen, that somebody goes for the center goal, somebody goes for the corner vortex, and then you're separate, right?
Well, with such shared resources, it's going to
You've
be
got
pretty
to
difficult.
you've got to do at least resource management,
Especially
Yeah.
because the balls are being flung across the field now,
Yeah.
and we are not allowed to stop them from doing that.
yeah.
But so it's something to consider, and that's something to consider when working with your shooter. If you've got to chase balls, you might want something that's easier to change the distance or the angle at which it's firing, so that if you go and chase a ball and you can't get back to this exact spot you were shooting before, you can still have a chance of scoring.
Yeah.
Those are our thoughts on the shooting
All right.
mechanism.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. We'll be back hopefully sometime next month. So keep watching out for our podcast. Check us out at other sources online. And I guess our music is called Pangea by Professor Click on jamendo.com.
This has been Tobor Time. Thank you.